Welcome to this webinar on music and dyslexia, and thank you very much to the ISM Trust for inviting my colleague Paula Bishop-Liebler and me, Sally Daunt, to speak to you today. We're both members of the British Dyslexia Association's Music Committee, which is also known as BDA Music. You can't see us, but you should be able to see the presentation on your screen. You should be able to hear us, but we can't hear you. If you have any questions for us, please type them in the questions box on your screen and we'll try to answer as many of them as possible at the end. A recording of this webinar and the PowerPoint presentation will be freely available on the ISM website after today's broadcast. Go to ism.org/webinars. We have a lot to tell you and we don't have the time to go into a great deal of detail today. But as I've just said, the slides will be available for you to look at in more detail later. We will in fact gloss over some of them that contain details such as web addresses that would be too boring to read out and too difficult for you to write down quickly. You can also contact the BDA via its helpline or BDA Music specifically for more information, and we'll be giving details of our email address. I'm sure that the ISM will also pass on any queries. So, I'm Sally Daunt. I was a member of the ISM for many years before I left full-time music teaching, where I specialised in work at secondary and FE level. I also worked on the Manchester ISM committee. I'm currently chair of the British Dyslexia Association's Music Committee, and for the last 15 years I've worked as a one-to-one support tutor in higher education, mainly helping students who are dyslexic. Currently, I work at the Liverpool Institute for Performing Arts. Although I've been a piano teacher, I haven't usually worked with students who are quite as young as the one in the photo.
Hello, I'm Paula Bishop-Liebler. I also work as a support tutor, but with conservatoire students in London. And I also do assessments for dyslexia at university level. I recently completed my doctoral research in the area of music and dyslexia at the UCL Institute of Education. Before my doctorate, I studied singing as part of my master's degree at the Royal Academy of Music, and I've taught singing for a number of years. So, why should we be interested in the whole subject of dyslexia? Well, it's generally accepted that about 10% of the population are dyslexic. So those of you who are music teachers are very likely to have come across pupils who are dyslexic. If you're a performer, either professional or amateur, a composer, a parent, or someone who is involved in music in some other way, you may have often wondered what dyslexia is all about and whether it relates to music and perhaps to difficulties that you yourself might have. We hope that this webinar will help you to understand more about the whole subject. The good news is that many of the strategies which musicians who are dyslexic find useful in supporting their musical learning are good approaches for many musicians. It's therefore more about reframing and adding to what you already do rather than having to teach or learn in a completely different way.
The session today will be divided into a number of sections which I'll outline now. We plan to talk for about 40 minutes, allowing plenty of time for questions after that. The first two sections briefly describe the main features of dyslexia and how teachers can recognise dyslexic pupils. Importantly, we'll examine, of course, how dyslexia relates to music and how we can help. We'll include some points about adjustments that can be made in music exams and show you where to find more information.
So let's start with a definition. There are many definitions of dyslexia, but this one, from an independent review of the primary curriculum, chaired by Sir Jim Rose in 2009, covers the commonly agreed upon features. We won't be reading all the PowerPoint slides out to you, word for word, but this is so important that I'm going to do that here and give some explanations as I go along. So this is the definition. Dyslexia is a specific learning difficulty that primarily affects the skills involved in accurate and fluent word reading and spelling. Characteristic features of dyslexia include difficulties in phonological awareness, This term phonological awareness broadly means the ability to reflect on the sound structure of words. Other features are difficulties with verbal short-term memory and verbal processing speed, or to put it in another way, the time it takes to process verbal information that is familiar, such as letters and numbers. Dyslexia occurs across the range of intellectual abilities, meaning that it doesn't equate with IQ. It is best thought of as a continuum, not a distinct category, and there are no clear cut-off points. Someone can therefore be mildly to severely dyslexic. Co-occurring difficulties or other problems that can coexist side by side with dyslexia may be seen in aspects of language, motor coordination, mental calculation, concentration and personal organisation, but these are not markers of dyslexia on their own. For example, someone who has problems with concentration may be due to dyslexia, but such problems may also be due to something else completely. A BDA definition here. As a consequence of the working definition created by the Rose Review, the Management Board of the BDA adopted this, but with the addition of the paragraph that you see here. This acknowledges the visual difficulties that dyslexic individuals can have and their possible strengths. So here's that additional definition. In addition to these characteristics, the BDA acknowledges the visual and auditory processing difficulties that some individuals with dyslexia can experience, and points out that dyslexic readers can show a combination of abilities and difficulties that affects their learning process. Some also have strengths in other areas, such as design, problem solving, creative skills, interactive skills, and oral skills, and we'll be coming back to some of these points. To summarise then, some key features of dyslexia are that it primarily affects language processing, which leads to difficulties with reading and writing. It's a cognitive difference in the way that the brain processes language. It's independent of intelligence. It's a continuum or a range of difficulties. It's hereditary, and it's also developmental, in that it relates to a failure to acquire reading skills rather than a difficulty later in life due to, say, a brain injury, which would be termed acquired dyslexia. So dyslexia is well documented as being something that covers the lifespan. Many teenagers and adults with dyslexia will be what is known as well-compensated dyslexics. This means that the person in question has cracked the code and created strategies that enable them to read and write, but the speed and accuracy of their processing is a persistent difficulty throughout life.
So, what's it like being dyslexic? Well, try reading this. Having a go at it? Did you work it out? It says, once upon a time there were two bears. The letters have all been sort of pushed up. That might have been quite a struggle to read, and that can be like what it's like for dyslexic people. Because of the extra effort needed for so many activities, exhaustion and stress are common for many dyslexic people, and I certainly see this a lot in the students that I work with. Dyslexic people frequently have low self-esteem too, so may need lots of encouragement, patience and support. My own students, who are at least 18 and sometimes much older, often say, "No one believed that I was any good at school apart from my parents," and go on to tell me of the struggle that they've had for years and the relief it was to have a diagnosis of dyslexia and realise that there's a reason for their difficulties. They've had a lifetime of being told that they're thick and knowing themselves that that's not the case. However, it's not all bad news. You may remember from the section that the BDA added to the definition we gave at the beginning that dyslexic people often have strengths in creative skills and other areas such as design, problem solving and interactive or oral skills. This is partly because the dyslexic brain seems to be particularly good at seeing a whole picture. Dyslexic people often make good architects, for example. Both Nigel Kennedy and Richard Branson are good examples of creative dyslexic people who've used their strengths to succeed in different ways. And you may have heard the often quoted example that Einstein himself was dyslexic.
So the umbrella in this image represents the fact that dyslexia falls under a sort of canopy of many different specific learning difficulties, not just dyslexia. You'll find these referred to as SPLDs in many books and articles. Other specific learning difficulties include dyspraxia, which is primarily about coordination, dyscalculia or dyscalculia, a difficulty understanding basic numerical concepts, attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder or ADHD, and autistic spectrum disorders. We don't have time to look at these in detail today, but it's common for them to overlap and for an individual to have more than one of these profiles.
Dyslexic people sometimes have a problem with what's called visual stress, although this can also affect people who aren't dyslexic, and it isn't an actual feature of dyslexia itself, it just often co-occurs. This can result in material on a printed page, and this can include music, distorting in various ways. The slide here is just a simulation of one kind of distortion, but many people find that text or music jumps around, making it difficult to read. There are certainly ways of helping this problem though, including the use of coloured overlays or the printing of material on coloured backgrounds, as you can see here. It's important that individuals choose the colour that suits them, and ideally a person who feels that this is a problem should see a specialist optometrist who can prescribe tinted glasses, which can be really helpful for musicians who need to work with pages being turned over quickly. It's possible for anyone to buy a pack of 10 coloured overlays which include a range of different colours, and these can be used to try out with people who can then buy just one of the colour that works for them. They don't help everyone, but on the other hand, they can make a lot of difference. They can also be used in front of a computer screen. On this slide are some details about optometrists, where to go to get a colorimeter test to see whether tinted glasses might help, and also where to get coloured overlays from. You can look at this in detail afterwards. Full information is also on the BDA website.
Beyond the colour of the score, which can heavily impact those with visual stress we've just seen, the visual format of musical notation can support or hinder dyslexic musicians' processing speed, and indeed any musician's processing. It's therefore useful to consider the visual format before other strategies. Aspects worth considering include the proportion of the bars. For example, it can be confusing when a bar full of semiquavers is followed by a visually shorter bar of minims. And how visually busy the score is. For example, a lot of dynamic markings, bow markings, or other written instructions can make it difficult to process the visual score. The layout of rhythmical groupings can also be very confusing. If you're in the position to be writing out music using computer software, or even by hand, then it's well worth considering these things, and any publishers listening today, please take note. Additionally, if you're teaching and you're thinking of marking up a pupil's score, have a think about the amount of stuff that you're putting on the score. Is it really helping or hindering? Ask the pupil who is concerned. Later, we'll be mentioning the possibility of using colour as an aid when annotating a score. It's possible to adapt music to make it easier to read by enlarging and by changing the background colour or the colour of the notation. Again, the particular colours chosen need to be individualised. What works for one person may not work for another. A system called modified Stave notation is particularly useful here as it enlarges just the section of music that needs it rather than everything, including the spaces between the notes and the staves. The original piece of music needs to be scanned, played or typed into the music notation package first of all. Most of these packages have lots of variables for altering the size, appearance and placing of all the various bits of the score. A website is given here which gives you a lot more detail about how this thing works, including a video tutorial on the use of the software MuseScore. As you can see, it was the RNIB that helped to develop this, and it's very useful for visually impaired musicians as well as those who are dyslexic. Other technology, such as ForScore or Sight Read Limited, will also allow you to put music onto a tablet, which can be foot controlled for page turns. Music can be fully annotated on the screen. Types of display can vary enormously, as you can see here. This technology is already being used by professional musicians, and many of my conservatoire students have reported how useful it is. For visually difficult bar proportions or rhythmical groupings, rewriting the section of music using music notation software such as Sibelius can make the music much easier to process as well.
You may be thinking that many of this modification includes rewriting or photocopying music or copying it in some other way. And this, as we know, is generally illegal. So, what can we do? The details on this and the following PowerPoint image are an extract from the Music Publishers Association Code of Fair Practice. This makes it clear that it's perfectly okay to photocopy music in order to make it easier to read for someone who has a cognitive impairment such as dyslexia. You'll be able to read the detail on the slides on the ISM website. The key thing to remember is that you must have a legally acquired copy of the printed music in your possession, and in an exam, for example, the original copy must be taken along. Look at the Music Publishers Association's Code of Fair Practice for more details. The link is on this slide. If you have to give a pupil written information, or if you have to access written information yourself, then there are a few guidelines here that can make life easier for dyslexic readers. Again, what works for one person may not work for another. For example, the use of a sans serif font, meaning one without the twiddles on the letters, like Times New Roman has, can make the text much clearer. The BDA has a dyslexia style guide for further information if you're interested, which you can easily search for online. But there are a few key points here, such as avoiding sections of text in italics or capital letters, using good spacing and a decent sized font. If you have to give a pupil some written information, such as practice tips for the next week, it's probably better to avoid handwriting this if you possibly can. It can be really difficult for dyslexic readers to access such material. You could consider sending such information to the students afterwards electronically or putting it on their phone during the lesson.
So how can we recognise that someone we teach or someone we know, or indeed we ourselves, might be dyslexic or have another specific learning difficulty? Well, one of the key indicators is a mismatch between someone's perceived intellectual ability and the way that the person actually works from day to day. The person may seem to have grasped a skill on one occasion, only to almost have to start again from scratch on the next attempt. And instrumental or voice teachers might be in a particularly good position to recognise this as going on. There might be issues relating to weak processing speed. That is, the person may take much longer to do tasks than many others would. There may be short-term memory issues again, and it may be possible to see the emotional impact of specific learning difficulties in the form of anxiety, stress, or poor self-esteem. Difficulties processing visual material, which have already been mentioned today, may also be present. So after all this, I hope that you're beginning to get a sense of how dyslexia might affect music, and to link up some of the features that we've described with features of people that you may know and may think they might be dyslexic. Some commonly reported difficulties with music include the reading of musical notation, especially sight reading, a difficulty having to learn new music quickly. Rhythm can be a problem, both orally and when working from notation, and aspects of music theory, such as remembering how many sharps or flats are in a key signature, working out interval names, and remembering the patterns and recognizing cadences. Looking up and down between a conductor and music can result in losing our place, and can certainly be stressful and exhausting. Taking information from written music, especially fingerings, and applying them to a particular instrument can be difficult. And, as we've seen, short-term memory problems can also mean that oral work is challenging, particularly tasks such as dictation, where musical information needs to be retained in short-term memory and then processed using language and then transformed from an auditory input into a written form. The sort of sustained concentration that's needed in music can lead the dyslexic musician in particular to situations of exhaustion and stress.
So, there are ways around these issues, and here are some possible strategies. The idea of working from sound first may be a challenge to some instrumental teachers, but it's important to work in the way that a student learns, not necessarily in the way that we've always done it ourselves, or perhaps the way we ourselves learnt. It may be that written music isn't really necessary for a particular student all the time, particularly in some genres. Improvisation and memorization could be useful skills and more fulfilling for some people than working from notation. We've talked about the possible benefits of coloured overlays or tinted glasses and changing the format for music to make it easier to access. A multi-sensory approach can always be useful, and we'll discuss this further. The use of overlearning or revision is often crucial. Giving a pupil or ourselves plenty of time to firm up skills and being patient are key teaching techniques that apply to most people. As musicians, we're fortunate that our subject always involves doing, because involvement is so important. This quote, which I think is from Benjamin Franklin, is particularly true for work with dyslexic individuals. Tell me, and I'll forget. Teach me, and I may remember. Involve me, and I'll learn.
Organisation is not only difficult for some dyslexic people, but it can be a complex feature of many musicians' lives, as there's no such thing as a typical week for a musician. Rehearsals can be at irregular times, practice needs to be organised, and this involves not only finding a time to do it, but also working out what needs to be done in the practice session. There's often a need to have quite a lot of different things at all these activities and to remember to take them. We may well all know students who constantly turn up to their music lesson without the right music, or even who turn up to the wrong time and place. So, how can we help these students? We can help our pupils with these problems or adapt these strategies for ourselves. Not only creating a to-do list can be helpful, but perhaps attaching such lists to the music case so that they can't be lost would be a good strategy. Using technology in various ways is also a great tool, such as sending texts and emails to students, encouraging the student to put information and reminders on their phone during the lesson, having a website with useful information, and perhaps also posting videos with them, for example, demonstrations of how to practice. We probably need to think outside the box here. The more imaginative we can be with these strategies, the better, and we always need to remember to tailor approaches to particular individuals. One size doesn't necessarily fit all.
Other strategies within a lesson, and these, as you'll know, are good teaching techniques for all people, include outlining the content of a lesson at the beginning and subsequently summarising points during and after the lesson. Giving information in chunks, like the way we break up a telephone number in order to remember it, but on a bigger scale. Breaking down tasks and having small targets. It's really important to make very sure of one point or one skill before moving on. Outside the lesson, in instrumental or vocal groups, the use of a friendly study buddy who can help a dyslexic musician to be sure of the place, for example, or quietly remind them of instructions can really help. The use of colour can be very useful, but it's crucial that pupils choose their own preferred colour and annotate any music themselves rather than the teacher doing it for them. For example, repeated phrases and patterns in a piece might be treated in this way, and if you think that you might want to make changes in the future, then make a copy of the music and annotate that.
Many difficulties are fairly easily solved. For example, a difficulty remembering instructions or remembering music in oral tests because of short-term memory issues can be helped. Writing down information or music into shorter chunks. The skills of remembering longer phrases in oral tests can be gradually built up, and the ISM at least has told us that it might be possible for dyslexic candidates taking exams at the highest level to have musical phrases in oral tests split into two sections. As right and left, for example, muddled up, can be helped. Examiners are happy to do this for dyslexic or dyspraxic candidates. You can also ask for this to happen in driving tests as well, by the way. The words we use in music can be confusing at the best of times, so be sure that your pupil understands terms such as high and low by demonstrating.
The sensory approach is an excellent way of reinforcing skills and ideas for all people. But for those who have a specific learning difficulty, it's an excellent approach as it taps into all areas of the brain, and particularly the right hemisphere, which is often an area of strength for such people. Using a multisensory approach means constantly applying the imaginative use of the visual, the aural, and the kinesthetic, that is, the sense of the body's movement. Approaches such as mind maps, the use of colour, recordings, and hands-on exploration are a wonderful way of using the whole of the brain. If you're not quite sure what mind maps are, it's easy to find examples on the internet. A pupil who finds it difficult to organise his or her private practice might be helped by creating a mind map of what needs to be done and the possible order in which this can happen. Don't forget that reading and writing have their place too, and the mouth movements involved with speaking or singing aloud and the hand movements involved in writing can all help to reinforce ideas.
So here are some examples of multisensory approaches that I'm sure you'll be thinking of plenty of situations yourselves. Within the teaching of set works for GCSE or A-level or in higher education, pupils can be encouraged to play and sing themes. In oral work, intervals can be created by making shapes in the air or taking bigger or smaller steps on the ground. Complex chords, such as the different kinds of sevenths, can be built up using different coloured blocks to represent major and minor words. The recognition of metre can be reinforced by movement, walking, stamping, running, and so on, and this leads on to the next suggestion, as the approaches of Dalcroze in particular are based on the encouragement of the whole body in the process of musical perception, learning, creativity and expression, as it says on their website. If you're a private instrumental teacher and you've never tried jumping around the room with your pupils, give it a go. If you don't already know about Dalcroze or these other approaches like Kodai, it's very useful to look at these in the context of music and dyslexia, as they have much to offer us. Sadly, we don't have time here to go into any detail today, but it's easy to find out more about these on their website, both the British Kodai Academy and Dalcroze UK. Both institutions offer training as well. If you're a teacher or parent, you may be wondering what to do if you feel that a student or someone else that you know may be dyslexic or have another specific learning difficulty. If the person in question is at school, then the best person to talk to is the SENCO, the Special Educational Needs Coordinator at the school. Of course, this would need to be done via parents and guardians. It may be possible for an assessment to be arranged, but such tests can also be done privately, and this would be the route for adults. The BDA website has a section on assessments, which we will give more detailed information.
Many of the issues that we've touched upon have an impact on music exams. BDA Music has recently had excellent meetings with some of the major examination boards who are already providing much help in this area, and will shortly be producing guides to the sort of adjustments that the boards are able to make to accommodate people with specific learning difficulties, and also an outline of the very many alternative syllabuses that are available. Please contact us if you'd like this information. All the boards have information about this on their website and are happy to discuss individual arrangements.
There are various ways in which dyslexia can have an impact on different areas of music exams. We've already mentioned possible difficulties with sight reading and the accessing of written material. Short-term memory problems can affect oral tests and the remembering of instructions. Certainly at higher grades, these can include 5 or more separate pieces of information, as in here. Please play B, harmonic, minor, a third apart, staccato. A dyslexic candidate, particularly one under stress in an exam, may well have forgotten the key by the time the instructions come to an end. In music theory exams, the number of instructions to follow can be confusing at the best of us, and reading these under the time pressure of an exam and then interpreting them can be particularly challenging for those who are dyslexic.
There is good news. The 3 major exam boards, the Associated Board of the Royal Schools of Music, Trinity College and London College of Music, as well as others such as Rock School, all make what are called reasonable adjustments for candidates with a large range of disabilities, and this includes those with specific learning difficulties. This doesn't make the exam easier, it just allows such candidates to operate on a level playing field with those who aren't disabled. Dyslexia is classed as a disability, and in law it's illegal to discriminate against disabled people. Full details are available on the websites of the different boards, and we provide some links to these in a moment, but some adjustments can include the following things. Time allowances in both practical and written exams, in the same way that this is available in GCSEs, O-level and other such public exams. Performing the different components of an exam in any order the candidate wishes. Place scales if a candidate has got muddled, even to use a scale book for reference in the exam. Similarly, the use of words as a prompt may be allowed in a voice exam, although in these last 3 cases it may not always be possible to gain the highest marks. Additional attempts at oral may be allowed, and there may be the option for a candidate to annotate a sight reading test during the preparation period, using colour if that helps. However, it's really important to emphasise that all of these options may not be available for all boards or at all levels. You do need to check this very carefully and in plenty of time before any exam entry.
So written material that has to be accessed in either practical or theory exams, including sight reading tests, for example, can all be provided in various formats for candidates. But, as Sally's just been saying, such requests must be in plenty of time, and examples of type of paper or print required usually needs to be sent to the exam board in advance. Music or written instructions can usually be enlarged, printed on different coloured paper, and possibly with different coloured fonts and using modified Stave notation. Candidates who use coloured overlays can certainly take those into an exam.
The websites of the different exam boards are easy to find, but specific links to the sections on reasonable adjustments are provided here, and these should take you straight to the relevant section. You can access this information later on the ISM website by searching for webinar and finding this presentation. The key thing to remember, and I know we're repeating ourselves a bit here, but it's so important, the key thing to remember about such adjustments in music exams is any application for adjustments must be applied for many weeks before the exam and the appropriate section filled in on the entry form. Written proof of a candidate's dyslexia must be available. I spoke earlier about getting a formal assessment for someone who is dyslexic, and it's this sort of proof that's needed. If the candidate in question is at school, then it should be possible to get this information from the Special Educational Needs Coordinator with parents' or guardians' permission. This must be on an official form or the school's headed notepaper. For adults who don't have a formal assessment such as this, the BDA website gives details of screening tests that can be used. And in our experience, the music exam boards are very helpful if adults contact them about the problem of proof. BDA Music at the email address on this slide or the exam board itself if you need further help in this matter. There are a huge variety of alternative syllabuses available, some of which may be more appropriate for particular students with particular needs. For example, there are quite a number of exams which have no pass-fail option at all, and these can be really useful for many candidates. We're probably all aware of the different areas that many boards also offer, including in exams in ensembles of various kinds, jazz, rock, and pop, and so on. There are many exams which offer the opportunity to play without having to do sight reading, scales, or aural. We may believe that these are all crucial skills for musicians, and of course they are for many of us, but they're not necessarily the be-all and end-all for all candidates, who might be put off music altogether by having to do such things, especially in an exam situation. Indeed, the London College of Music Performance Award allows a candidate to be assessed through the submission of a DVD, and this could be a godsend for someone whose anxiety is really acute, but who would benefit from some comments by an outside assessor. Do have a look at the many alternative syllabuses that there are out there.
So finally, how can we find out more about this whole subject of dyslexia, specific learning difficulties and their impact on music? There are plenty more strategies suggested in our information booklet on music and inclusive teaching. Just email us and we'll send you an electronic copy. This book by Sheila Oglethorpe, Instrumental Music for Dyslexics, is also packed with suggestions and further strategies. The book Music, Other Performing Arts and Dyslexia is available from the BDA website. It includes more detail about many of the sections that we've mentioned today. It also has some information about the impact of specific learning difficulties on acting, dance, and even drawing, some of which, as you can imagine, have similarities to music. And these two books were produced by the BDA Music Committee in 2002 and 2008. They contain many chapters by people in different areas of music, including instrumentalists and singers, both amateur and professional. You can find details of these books using a search engine. There's a particularly interesting chapter in Music and Dyslexia Opening New Doors about a professional pianist who was discovered to be severely dyslexic when she was 36. This chapter is also available from us as a separate article, as the issues raised in it are extremely interesting and applicable to many musicians and many different instruments. This particular pianist struggled with different teachers until she was allowed to take the lead in the lessons. Her later and more successful teacher realised that a different approach was needed from the one that he would normally take. She saw patterns and shapes in the music and importantly needed to get a really good grasp of the whole of the piece before she started to work on detail, rather than working from the detail and building up to the whole. It really would be very useful to get this chapter from us and take a more detailed look. So a BDA course, Practical Solutions for Music Learning and Dyslexia, has run successfully for the last 2 years and will be available again this year. It has an e-learning preparatory module, followed by 2 days in London in April. It's led by Karen Marshall, who's an experienced teacher, and it can lead to a Level 2 qualification. Details of how to enrol on this or to find out more are given on this slide.
We hope that you've got the point that we've been trying to make throughout this webinar, that good strategies for dyslexic people are in fact usually good strategies for everyone. So please encourage others to go to the website of the ISM, search for webinar and look at the information here. Please also feel free to contact BDA Music if you have further queries or if you'd like a copy of our information booklet. Our email address is bdamusicdyslexia@gmail.com. We'll now try to address some of the questions which you're sending in. Thank you so much for registering for this webinar and for taking part in the presentation. Right, we're just looking at a few questions that have been coming in. Mary Black, I don't know whether it's the Mary Black who works at Liverpool Hope University, has written, you spoke about multisensory approaches. In a classroom situation, if a teacher wants pupils to listen to some music, is it more or less useful for dyslexic pupils to see visual images, e.g. from YouTube, rather than only hearing it, or seeing images which show the music being played?
I would say do everything.
Yes,
so
that's
yeah,
right.
Yeah, have the music on, have any visual images that you can, and sing along.
Dance around the room to it,
Absolutely.
as many different things as possible.
Yeah.
There's never really a right or wrong anyway.
Definitely not. Yeah, absolutely. Try different things, and different students within the class might enjoy different aspects of it.
Absolutely. Yes, yeah. Okay, and then there's another one here who thanks us for a very interesting webinar. I'm glad you liked it. And this person, Jo Vasey, says that she teaches class music in a primary school, and she was wondering whether if we had any more specific kinesthetic techniques for learning music that we could recommend. I would say that the best thing to do is to look at Dalcroze's website, and you can either Google that or go back to one of our previous slides. And the approach of Dalcroze, which I think was developed in the late 19th century, something like that, very much depends on movement. And certainly one of our colleagues on the BDA Music Committee is doing a Dalcroze course at the moment, and she's enormously enthusiastic about the way in which that works.
Yeah, it seems to be extremely helpful, and it works in such a sort of doing things in very small increments, and that everyone's able to be involved, and that there's no sense of doing it right or wrong was one of the things that came across really nicely. And so that would be encouraging for anybody who might be finding it difficult as well.
Yes. People are asking whether they can see other people's questions, but we're reading them out. And can you print out the handout for later reference? I would say the best thing is to contact us, and we will let you have an electronic copy of our information booklet, which really has most of the points on that we're looking at today. Now, here's somebody, David I'm sorry, I'm not quite sure how you pronounce your name, David. Have you encountered the open dyslexic font? If so, is it any good? Yeah, I was looking at this only the other day. I think it works for some people and it doesn't for others, in the same way that I have students who absolutely love Times New Roman.
I do too.
So you just can't generalise. And even if you're teaching very young pupils, a 5-year-old knows what's best for him or her.
Yeah,
we are all experts on ourselves. Yeah, try different things. If they work, great. If not, never mind. Okay. Right, something from Elaine Doffman, who I know, and Dave, who I've just spoken to, teaches at St Edmund Arrowsmith. I don't know, that might also be near me, because there's certainly a school of that name near. And we don't have any more questions at the moment, so nobody's asked us anything terribly difficult.
Oh right, here we go.
Oh my goodness, they're all pouring in now. Right, Abby, thank you. Abby has said, for schools that aren't well resourced, only an interactive whiteboard and keyboards, how could you suggest to make it as interactive as possible without lessons becoming stale and repetitive?
Interesting.
I think yourself you can do things. I had one of my greatest friends was the most brilliant primary school teacher I've ever known, and she used to sing to her pupils all the time. She used to sing the register and sing questions, and they loved it, and that was a great way of being multisensory. I think you can have posters which are different colours. You know, you can dance around, jump around.
Yeah, you can use balls. You can. It's very good for rhythm,
Yeah.
isn't it? And you could do the register, doing it with a ball and throwing it to each student and getting them to do the syllables of their names. I mean, you just being creative.
You have
really.
to be, I think, as creative. But I think this is the great thing for all teachers, and we probably all know this. The more creative you can be as a teacher, the more you can think outside the box, and the more you can go with the ways your pupils work, rather than the way we did it, in my case, many, many years ago, then the better.
Yeah, ask them what they'd like to do with this.
Now, here's an interesting one. Do you use the same strategies for dyspraxic pupils as for those with, presumably mean dyslexia? Perhaps Paula could just remind us what dyspraxia is.
So dyspraxia is primarily about coordination difficulties. I think, as a general rule, there's a lot of crossover between the two in terms of the strategies that I would use, but the dyspraxic students will probably have more acute difficulties with timing than the dyslexic students, and perception of time passing may be a difficulty area for them. If you'd like to maybe, if there are any particular things, I don't think this is the forum to go into particular areas, but it would be the same sorts of things, but with maybe more of a focus on the rhythmical aspects of things.
Yeah. And Joanna has sent a couple of questions in. Are some of the symptoms you discussed common in people without dyslexia? I find these problems in my pupils who I think are not dyslexic, e.g. forgetting things the next week. Yeah, we all do that, of course.
Absolutely. I mean, as we were saying, it's a continuum. There's no clear cut-off. So these are profiles that we've got these particular areas of cognitive weakness that people have identified this profile, which we call dyslexia. And so we are all, if we're tired, for example, you're more likely to forget things. But for people who are dyslexic, the severity of their difficulties are going to be more acute than for people who are not. Their profile is not sort of specific to a dyslexic profile.
Yes, I mean, Joanna also says she finds it makes it difficult to tell if someone's dyslexic or not. And in one sense, it doesn't matter whether you put the label on. Yep. You work with the pupil as they are in front of you, or pupils.
Absolutely.
If you need a label in order to get special considerations in exams, then you've got to go down the diagnostic assessment route. Yep. And then that will highlight particular difficulties, but otherwise labelling is no more or less useful than saying whether somebody's got blue or brown eyes, really. You go with the person. But I totally take your point.
Yeah, as a teacher, it's all about helping the student, not about labelling them. I mean, it can be very useful for the individual, particularly as an adult, I find, to know whether or not they have the profile of dyslexia, because as you were mentioning earlier, Sally, that can help them understand why they've had problems and understand themselves better. But for us as teachers, what's most important is finding ways to help.
Absolutely. Right, Nicola Jane Kemp has sent in a very challenging question, very interesting, Nicola. She has a student who is a call scholar at Cambridge who's just been diagnosed with dyslexia. Time is being taken to help her academically. She studies theology, I gather, but should she continue to sing in the choir? She struggles to keep up with the sight reading, but she's a very valuable and excellent singer, stroke stage animal. What strategies could Nicola recommend to the director of music who won't have time to make special allowances, or she says make special allowances, music, etc.? I mean, the student could certainly take a coloured overlay along. That wouldn't necessitate pre-printing music differently.
If they could have the music in advance, then that would take a lot of pressure off the sight singing. Obviously, they haven't got that much time probably to be preparing things, but then that would at least take a bit of the strain off if they could look through it beforehand. They could also listen to recordings of the music, if that would probably help them. So getting things in advance where they probably know what they're going to be singing. So that would be one of the key things. If you want to contact me via the BDA Music Dyslexia email address, I'd be very happy to talk to you in a bit more detail, because I support students who are at HE level.
Yes, I mean, I think Nicola's also concerned about the amount of time that this poor student is having to take on. So should she give up the choir because she's struggling with her theology? I mean, when I was watching the boat race the other day, I never quite understand how these people manage to do so many things. And it's the same with somebody who's a choral scholar. I mean, my feeling is that if the student succeeds in music and it gives her, I'm not sure whether it's a female or male, gives the person something important in their life, then they should try to continue. If the amount of pressure finishes up being intolerable, then they take some time out from being choral scholar.
That makes sense, absolutely.
It's a difficult one. You've just got to, again, weigh it up for the individual, but it's a very interesting question.
Yeah.
Anne Berry has mentioned a completely different issue, or well, a comment really. She's noticed that youngsters who have colour issues, not entirely sure what you mean by that, Anne, find whiteboards very difficult. I wonder if it could be the glare from the whiteboard, if there's anything that can be done about that. If you could maybe explain a bit more what you mean by colour issues. Whether of us can comment a bit any more than that on the moment. Right, Joanna has a very interesting question. She recently thought she had a pupil who had hyperactivity disorder or some kind of problem, but it turned out that he just wasn't interested in learning the piano and was messing about. Yeah, I know the sort of person. Fine, try another instrument. Absolutely. I mean, it may be that the pupil in question has ADHD or some other specific learning difficulty, but if they're just messing around, maybe try them on a different instrument, or send them to the football or something. You know, I think you're quite right. Now, Attar has sent quite a long question. He or she, I'm so sorry, I'm not quite sure which, is head of education for DIME Online, and says, do you think there is enough understanding and empathy from those in the music industry as to the difficulties for a dyslexic musician coming into the industry? Do higher education institutions need to address this with dyslexic students as part of the development of professional or employability skills during undergraduate study? Right, Paula, that's one for you.
Well, I think this is a very good question, and it's always one that I'm sure HE institutions are grappling with, and preparing their students both for the industry and also informing the industry of the kinds of issues that people have. I think this is a dialogue that HE is having, and it will continue. I don't know. I'm sure there are some areas of the industry that do have NPR, do have understanding, and others that don't. I think most areas.
I mean, I work at the Liverpool Institute for Performing Arts. I also work with acting students. Now, they also have a problem with sight reading. They are often and particularly in a professional situation, they have to sight read a cold text, so to speak. One student said to a colleague of mine, the text was so cold it was blooming frozen. And actually, they're probably less likely to have much time to prepare than professional musicians who orchestras, I've been told, that often can get music in advance. So I think you try to educate your employer as far as you can, but I know that many people are in a dilemma as to whether to disclose they're dyslexic because they then feel they might not be employed. And this can be a problem. You just have to go with the particular situation, really. David McKeague has sent another question, I think. Are some instruments more appropriate for dyslexic students to learn in order to achieve success than others?
Well, I think common experience is that keyboard instruments are very difficult to learn because of the multitasking of two hands. On the other hand, I think that keyboard awareness is a very useful thing to have. One of my, for my PhD, one of my case studies of a musician who's now in the profession said that from doing the keyboard, even though they struggled with it as a child, from doing the keyboard they had a much better understanding of how theory worked, how harmony worked, and how to play their other instruments. So I think keyboard awareness is great, but possibly not having the piano as the first instrument that you offer to a child. So melody instruments, things like guitar I've heard of and I've personally experienced are very positive as a first experience instrument. You can work just in shapes, you can instantly be able to sing your favourite tune. All of those kind of things can be very positive for introducing people. So melody instruments particularly.
Jane Mins has asked whether we can recommend a strategy for overcoming extremely poor melody. Memory, sorry, I say melody. Memory. For example, a pupil who takes more time to learn a piece than the duration of an exam board syllabus. Right, we're thinking about that one.
We need to know a little bit more about specific aspects of memory that they're finding difficult.
So is the particular pupil not able to access it from a written score and purely relying on memory? Or can you use the written score to aid the memory? Can you use recordings? That would be quite useful, I would have thought.
Drawing pictures, doing stories, talking about the score in lots of different ways before even starting to learn it. There are lots of different ways that you can try and engage the student in learning the piece without actually even touching the instrument.
And I mean, if it's such a struggle, then maybe look at some sort of alternative syllabuses that don't involve the same kind of maybe classical-based pieces. Maybe the student would be much better with popular music-based pieces in genre. The general question from Jacqueline Van: are all schools, universities, colleges and conservatoires by law compelled to give support for dyslexic pupils? If they know they're dyslexic, yes, under the Disability Discrimination Act and the Equality Act, yes. But the level of support
and exactly what that is.
Reasonable adjustments are what they say, so that if somebody's in a wheelchair and they can't access, say, the Bodleian Library in Oxford, it's such an ancient building, you wouldn't expect the Bodleian Library to build a ramp up the front of it. But presumably there are some ways in which people in wheelchairs can get in. So the adjustments have to be reasonable. How can we help students that refuse to use their visual aids as they don't want to feel different from their peers, especially in secondary schools, like coloured overlays or something like that? Tinted glasses can be quite cool, actually. Some students find them really cool to wear tinted glasses and don't necessarily need to tell their friends why. They've just got these really cool glasses. So maybe glasses rather than coloured overlays, which can be a bit non-cool. I know what you mean.
You can't force them.
No.
So if they're not using it, I mean, if they really feel the benefit, then they'll probably use it. And at least maybe using it in private and with yourself, if you're the teacher, then obviously that would help. And trying to talk to them about different ways that they can do it if they don't want to use it, and giving them the options.
Sharon Scott has asked, how do you deal with pupils when they're trying to play a duet or in an ensemble but can only concentrate on one thing at a time? By that, I mean that they find the other person playing a distraction. Don't do duets and ensembles, just do solo work. Sorry, that's a bit, I didn't mean that to come out sounding quite so flippant.
I think one thing would be to play duets with the teacher. So the teacher can be very quiet, can control the situation much better, and discuss what is distracting, and you can look at what aspects the student finds distracting, and then try and work on those separately and then bring it back together again, or play something extremely easy with somebody else and build it up slowly.
If a student has difficulty, this is Sue Craxton, if a student has difficulty distinguishing right and left hand and trouble reading music, not that it jumps up and down but doesn't seem to notice changes in pitch, is this indicative of dyslexia? I mean,
it could be.
It might not.
Yeah. It depends on how old they are. You know, there's a lot of different things that might be going on.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the things is, one of the key things about specific learning difficulties is that if you have taught somebody and they still don't get it, if they're still not grasping it, then that might give you more of an inkling. So that could be something. So try some different strategies with them, and then if they're still not getting it, then that might help you to differentiate whether or not it's a specific learning difficulty or not.
Somebody's just come back about the flippant comment that I made about ensemble. That just, well, don't do it, pointing out that, of course, ensemble work is compulsory in the new GCSE music exam, and of course that's absolutely true. So I guess that the person just needs to get to know the other people in the ensemble quite well.
That would help. And I think, yeah, maybe making their part slightly easier, and over-learning their part. Maybe doing things like singing the other part, so that you have so overlearned it that anything else, and practice distraction. I used to practice going wrong with my students and how they get back in. So let's practice being distracted, and then what am I going to do to get back in?
Yes. Okay. Thank you very much. There are one or two questions that we haven't been able to address because of time. Do please feel free to write to us at our email address or via the ISM.
Thank you so much.
Yes. Thank you.